My family does not do Christmas presents anymore, like besides little things like food type items, stuff you're not really stuck with for the rest of your life, mainly. And I'm glad. I'm really glad that we don't do presents. But it took me a while to really fully be glad about it. And whenever Christmas rolled around, as it got closer, I would really miss those holidays as a kid where you have piles of presents under the tree, or like getting together in a big family, and the unwrapping of presents takes hours. Those are very fond memories for me in childhood. And as we get near another Christmas, I wanted to talk about how my relationship with stuff and materialism and consumerism has changed over the years. For one thing, it's Christmas week and I've been very busy. I haven't had time to do any like really scripted, thought out videos. As I talked about in another recent video, in 2025, I'm planning to get this channel like a little more on topic, get a little more serious about it now that I've got a year under my belt and I've gotten a vibe for like what direction seems to work, what kind of channel this is. But before I go into that, I just wanted to have one more of these type of videos where I just kind of talk about what's on my mind, tangentially related to the channel. My name is Lydia Foxglove and I'm a fantasy writer. I've been a full-time creative since 2009. In 2009, I was 27 and I quit my crappy retail job to be a full-time writer after I sold my first book to Bloomsbury. And I've managed to make it work as a creative ever since then. And you might not think that topics of finance and being frugal and living a simple life are necessarily entwined with living a creative life, but having been in this a while, I can tell you that I would not be able to make it as a full-time creative if I wasn't very sensible about money and very willing to live a simple life. So I do videos about these kind of topics now and then. What this channel is ultimately about is how you can set yourself up to put your creative life first. And I think that stepping away from consumerist and materialist culture can give you a huge advantage in that regard, but it's not always easy. And particularly for me, my relationship with stuff and shopping and money, material stuff, all that has changed drastically in the last few years. So I wanted to talk about that evolution and how I've come to this point. When I was a little kid, I would say we were like stable poor, as in my parents got married pretty young, although not like freakishly young in 1982. It was still more common to kind of get married right away and have kids right away. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom, but we certainly were not living lavishly. Sometimes I say that I was born in 1982 and grew up in the 70s because essentially we did not have much of the 80s in our lives. Like we really were kind of living in the 70s. We had a mobile home from the 70s. It was all wood paneling and most of the stuff we had was hand-me-downs. I remember having the big black rotary phone, black and white TV. We didn't get a VCR until the 90s. We eventually got a color TV that was a hand-me-down, and it was one of those big boxes with like, the wood, all the wood. And we had that couch with like an old water mill or, autumn leaves or something on it. We were always fine. I never remember my parents being like outwardly stressed about money throughout my entire youth. Although I'm sure there were times when they probably were, but they at least didn't project it to us kids. And we always had food. We never had the electricity shut off, like there was none of that kind of thing. But my mom was very frugal. When we were little kids, we had cloth diapers that she washed by hand and hung on a laundry line outside the mobile home. It was very rural as well. This is not lavish. And I remember one Christmas where the only presents we got were basically from our grandparents and things that my dad made like out of wood, or that like my parents handmade all the presents. That was, I think, 88, and we didn't even care because my great-grandfather had just died, and as soon as Christmas was over, we packed up and drove to Ohio, and it snowed, and all we cared about was seeing snow. That was the best Christmas gift you could give Florida children, was just snow. By the time we got to like more elementary school age, teenagers, my parents were doing better. They had a house built. We probably ate out like once or twice a week. We would have like one vacation a year. It was like cheap stuff, like a road trip where you'd stay at great grandmas or nan and papas, or you'd usually be staying somewhere, or my mom would find like the best deal hotel by calling all the hotels in any given location. And we always had used cars with broken air conditioning, which was really miserable in Florida, but we had really good food. My mom ran an organic food co-op where the food would get dropped off at her house, and then her and all her friends would have to like sort it out based on who had bought what. She spent a lot of time on this, but it enabled us to have really good quality food. So I never felt like we were poor. In fact, I always got like this vibe that my parents were actually like really doing well and were sitting on a hoard of money and they were just really stingy, which probably was not really true, but I did always feel like they had savings. Anyway, that's all to set the scene and to say that really the only time in the year when I got to buy things or get things that I wanted was Christmas and my birthday, which is only about 3 weeks after Christmas. So basically December and January, I got whatever it was that I wanted as long as it wasn't unreasonable. Like I never asked for a video game system because I thought that we couldn't afford it, but they did get us the Super Nintendo. It was a huge surprise one year. And at some point they started giving us an allowance, which was like $2 a week or something. So we would save that allowance, and then once a month we'd go to the comic book store and buy ElfQuest comics, or sometimes I would just have to save the allowance like all year to buy a video game. My saga to buy a PlayStation and Final Fantasy VII is a whole story in and of itself. So we never felt financially unstable, but we'd have to be very patient. Mostly we went to the library, and that was the thrill. That was the dopamine hit of the week, was going to the library. It wasn't a huge library either, but we'd get our once a month trip to the comic book store, get a few more issues of ElfQuest. What this meant was that when I was a kid, I didn't own a lot, and what I did own was extremely precious to me. Like a lot of the books on my shelf, I reread many times. I would play my video games many times, and when you would get that stuff on Christmas morning, you get the new video game and the book that you were dying to have. I have like the fondest memory of Christmas Eve. I specifically said on my list, please tell Grandma and Grandpa to get me the ElfQuest Gatherum. We would get their presents on Christmas Eve so you could read them while you were waiting for Christmas morning. I remember opening it and like, what a thrill, and spending hours that night just poring over this book. It was like I can still taste the memory of how utterly delicious it was to finally own this book and read it. And then I hit adulthood. I got my first job. I made $6.25 an hour working at Sears, so we certainly were not rich. But I did have a little more spending money than $2 a week once I got a job. You know, I probably had like as much as $50 a month if I really wanted. So I was still very frugal. I did most of my shopping at thrift stores and used bookstores, same as when I was a kid. And I would mostly save my money to go on trips. I had to be very careful about what I spent money on. But at least I had wiggle room to decide if I really, really, really wanted something, like a video game or a book. I could usually have it instantly. I just had to be extremely selective about what those things were going to be. So it still felt special to get stuff. And that state of things mostly continued when I sold my first book. I made about $30,000 that year, which was about 3 times more than I'd made in any previous year. And I was 27. The first thing that I did was buy passes to Disney World because we lived in Orlando and I didn't really want to stay there. As soon as I did better, I wanted to move out of Florida. But I figured the first thing you should do is get Disney passes for a year and enjoy Disney casually. And that felt so magical. I felt like a bazillionaire. The day that we went to Disney and sat down with somebody, like, we're gonna buy passes, and then as soon as we bought them, we could just walk into the park. I mean, that was like the richest I've ever felt in my life. In 2012, I had my first six-figure book deal, and I was able to buy a house because luckily in 2012, houses were pretty much bottomed out price-wise, so I bought kind of a fixer-upper in semi-rural Maryland. It was definitely a house you buy when you don't have a lot of money, but nevertheless, it was a house that I owned. It felt very special. But after we bought the house, money was extremely tight for the next 4 years. I ended up having a lot of problems with the book deal, timing, everything just kind of turned to ass for a while. I felt almost as poor as I did when I was a child at that point. Like, we barely had enough money to pay the bills. Everything had to be really budgeted. There was like no money for fun. I had to borrow money from my parents. It sucked. I was so like embarrassed. I felt like I'd kind of achieved this big adulthood milestone and then failed miserably at it. And it was really stressful. But then in 2016, I launched my indie book career rather than being bound to traditional publishing with its very sporadic payments. Suddenly I was getting paid every month by Amazon, and although it started off kind of small, it was still like more reliable. And in 2017, when I started my pen name and I started writing to market, I almost immediately started making like real money, like a real salary. At this point, if you're keeping track, I was 35, and this was the first time in my life that I had made real, solid, monthly income that kept growing and was like the average household income or more. So this was the first time that I'd ever really made money. And as a result, I started to buy some more things. I started to buy all the things that I had dreamed of having my entire life, but had never really been able to afford. I bought this manga collection. I bought pretty much every RPG for the DS and 3DS. Not like right away, but over the period of 5 years or so. And honestly, that wasn't a lot. I was still being very frugal about it. I got most of this manga used very cheaply, and I was like finding manga I could resell as I was buying it. So I didn't really put out a whole lot of money to buy the manga collection. And the video games as well. There were like a lot of deals on eBay for a while at this time. And I was having a great time. I didn't realize the science of like why I was enjoying myself so much was that I was suddenly, for the first time, getting a very regular dopamine hit from buying something. Before, it was rare enough to buy something that although you do get the dopamine hit from buying the thing, I also really appreciated the thing because I had never been able to just buy whatever I wanted in as much quantity as I wanted. So anything I bought always really got used for the most part. You know, I might have bought a few more books than I could read because books are cheap, but generally everything I bought was something that I would actually use. This was the first time that I was able to just collect, buy more things than I actually had time for, particularly because my indie career was really taking off, and so I didn't really have a lot of free time. I was working all the time, trying to make as much money as possible, and I saved a lot of it. I was still very practical. I certainly didn't go into any debt or anything. I was banking large chunks of savings this entire time. So I could definitely afford to buy these things that I wanted. And then a few years ago, my father-in-law passed away, and he was definitely a collector who turned into a hoarder. Well, I'd say he always had hoarder tendencies, but it just kept getting worse the older he got. That collector to hoarder tipping point, where is it exactly? It's hard to say sometimes, but I can definitely say that he was past the tipping point and was definitely hoarding. He basically died right when he ran out of room. We've talked sometimes like, was that just kind of like, was his soul entwined with the size of his house and his collection? And basically as soon as he ran out of room to accumulate, that was it for him. We had to go clean out his stuff. He had left the stuff to us, and that was a very intimidating prospect. We only had a few days to clean out his entire house, and he had a lot of expensive stuff. He really was a collector, and almost everything he bought was like a huge Lego set or a very expensive statue of Wonder Woman or something like that. Like, it had value, but extracting the value from the mess was not an easy task. And he was a smoker, So everything was covered in this gross, smoky dust. And I spent 2 years cleaning everything, sorting it all out. Basically, I spent 2 years kind of trying to salvage this man's life's work of collecting all this stuff. I saw a little bit of myself in his house, the collector mindset. I was always the kid who loved to collect. I had a rock collection, stamp collection, a shell collection, kept all my old magazines, a coin collection. Don't forget the coin collection. I was collecting comic books. I kept all my video games in really nice condition with all the manuals and the boxes so that like they were kind of a collection. I even collected baseball cards even though I had never watched baseball because I just like to sort them. So I had this collector mindset, and I also don't like to throw things away. So I had 50 of those free Christmas cards that various companies send you trying to entice you to give them charity money. And I have drawers full of nonsense, like all those little extra doodads that IKEA gives you when you buy furniture, like, we might need these someday. And when I went through his house, he had a lot of that same kind of thing. And I realized, like, you're never going to use any of that. And also, your own collections are out of hand. Dade's collections are definitely out of hand because his father had, like, his love language was buying stuff. And he bought him so many things. Especially after his mom died, it was basically like, I'll buy you whatever you want and then we can talk about shopping, and that was kind of their thing. So we have more stuff than we can use. It even started when I first started this YouTube channel. I started it as a manga collecting channel, and I only made a few videos. I did one like unboxing haul video, and after I made it, I was like, what am I doing? What is it? Like, this isn't sustainable. I'd have to keep just buying so much stuff. And why am I even buying this stuff? Like, as soon as I made the channel about my collection, how big it was, and unwrapping more, I started to feel the absurdity of it, the gross consumerism of it all. And likewise, even as I made some videos nowadays about my collection of books, not so much my vintage clothes because those are just my clothes and I do wear them, but I've made a couple about like my book collection. As soon as I make the video, I almost start to feel like I can just get rid of half the books. Like I've chronicled that I owned them once, and now I can just pare down the ones that I don't really look at. So all of that has been swirling together in my mind. Going back to that childhood feeling that the things I owned meant so much to me, that when I opened this book on Christmas Eve, all I wanted to do was crack it open immediately. And now, when I get something I want, I often don't even have time to look at it. I have things that I was dying to have, or so I thought, and then once I acquired them, it was like, well, I have a million other things to do this week, so I'll get to that later. And in some cases, I never did get to the thing. Like, it might be years. And this thing that I was so excited to have, I still haven't read it or played it or done anything with it. That's so stupid. And then you look at just social media in general, and we've just never had this kind of, we just didn't own this much stuff. But now there's so much stuff to be had. And I still like stuff. I still have things that are treasures to me that I have no interest in getting rid of. And I'd still say that my sense of style leans a little more towards maximalist than minimalist. Like, some of this is just what makes you really feel good. I do think there are people who genuinely take great joy in having a house that's like jam full of things they love. But for me personally, I started to really miss that feeling as a child of when I would unwrap a present and it was the world to me. Or when I would finally get to buy a video game that I'd saved up for months for, and just the deliciousness of getting to pop that in my Super Nintendo and finally play it. Nothing feels like that anymore because I already have more stuff than I can enjoy in 10 years probably. And of course, social media helps to feed into this sometimes. I'll see other content creators on YouTube, things that they own in their houses or a beautiful dress that they bought. there's just all kinds of things that can entice you when you're on social media. So that continues to be a struggle. But the more I've been watching videos more about, you know, like no buy years, being frugal, and like the intensity of materialism and consumerism these days, and then thinking about my own core values and what they are, I've really stopped wanting to buy anything, and I've wanted to pare down my collection to be only those things that I'm really excited to experience. And that ties into our family Christmases, because everyone in my family has enough money to buy whatever it is that they want. It's really nice to get a well thought out gift, especially if it's something that you never even realized you wanted and someone really knows your taste. Or like when my friend sent me care packages after Hurricane Helene, like that was a particular circumstance where those little gifts really felt emotionally impactful. But that's like an optional thing. Like Christmas often feels like it's not optional. Like you're obligated to go rack your brain for what would be the most meaningful gift for like a whole list of people, some of whom you know better than others, some who want and need things more than others. It just started to feel kind of absurd. Like, I don't know what my dad wants. He can buy his own stuff. At this point in life, I'm just so happy to see him. But finding him a gift it feels so stressful. And you could say that about most of my family, really. Like, I don't know if the things I'm going to pick out for them are what they really want or need. So I'm really glad that my family's on the same page as me with all of this. And there's like that SNL skit about the woman apologizing as soon as everyone opens their gifts. And I'm totally that person. Like, as soon as you're peeling away the paper, I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry if you already had it. I don't know if you need this. I found it. And I thought that, you know, you mentioned 5 years ago that you need this thing. And I just thought, you know, I'm just like cringing the whole time that I give people gifts. Usually it's agony. So one of my big goals in 2025 is to pare down my collection. Date is on the same page as me. We're already in the process of starting to sell off a lot of the things we own. I'm going through my manga collection and I want to pare it down to the manga that I really love and want to reread. It's going to be way less than this. And it's felt very freeing to not keep around manga that are like mediocre. Just really focus on what I enjoy and be more selective about what I buy going forward. But every stage of my journey through stuff has made sense. I think it's a pretty normal part of the cycle that the first time that you really make like adult money to go buy a lot of stuff. And I don't think it's necessarily bad. I'm not like blaming myself for my past choices or anything. It's just that over the years I've realized that it didn't really give me what I thought. Like as a kid, that feeling I got getting something really precious to me, like you kind of think in the back of your mind that I'm just going to get that but multiplied. And that isn't what happens. Instead, it just becomes too much stuff. It starts to feel almost burdensome, and the things no longer feel precious. Nothing feels very precious anymore because there's just so much of it. It's overwhelming to even look at my TBR pile or the games that I still need to play because there's just so many of them. So I basically just went through that cycle of realizing that more stuff is not necessarily better. There is something really fulfilling about giving yourself a very tight budget to buy things and choosing the things that mean the absolute most and that you want the most. The thing that you're going to read the second you get your little hands on it. That's how I'm going to treat my stuff going forward. So anyway, that's about it. This is just kind of a ramble. I don't expect much from a video like this, but I just wanted to share that journey with you guys in case anybody else is kind of thinking about their own relationship with stuff, or if holiday gifts are stressful to you and you like to pare back on them. It can be hard when your family has expectations or you can't stop them from giving you gifts, but I am giving you permission to ease off on it if you start to realize that it's more stressful than it is pleasant. But whatever you do for the holidays, whatever and however you celebrate, I hope that you have a wonderful week. I'm going to take Wednesday off to enjoy Christmas, and then I'll be back on Sunday with my year in review, income in review, and then it'll be 2025, and I have a lot of really exciting plans for videos for 2025. So I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.